Hi, and welcome back to Sustainable Futures, career conversations with leading professionals from the world of sustainability. I'm delighted to say I'm here today with Rachel Solomon-Williams, the Executive Director of Aldersgate Group. Rachel, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I lead the Aldersgate Group Secretariat. We're an organisation that brings together businesses, NGOs and academic institutions to work on policy and talk to the government and policymakers about climate change and the environment.
Fantastic. It's a really interesting organisation. I'm looking forward to talking about it in a bit more detail as we go through. I wanted to start with your entry point into sustainability, which is a relatively unusual one. Just talk to me about that sort of early stages into sustainability.
Yeah, so I was always an environmentalist as a child. I went vegetarian at the age of 9,
Right.
And I was one of the founder members of the first ever branch of Junior Friends of the Earth when I was a child as well. So I've always had an interest in the environment, but wasn't quite sure about what my career path was going to be. So I thought about doing engineering and I thought about doing music, and the two things kind of came and went during my secondary school years. When the music stopped, as it were, and I had to choose my degree path, I decided to do a music degree, which I don't regret at all. It was incredibly enjoyable. I learned a lot. It was a very academic course, so it taught me how to think and it taught me how to explore ideas and all of that. But I got halfway through and I thought being a musician is complicated, difficult, really badly paid, and all sorts of other things. And if I could think of something in the environmental field, I'd rather do that. So somebody pointed me towards the civil service exams for their fast stream graduate programme, and the fact that you could go into different departments and give a preference for where you wanted to work if you were successful in passing their exams. So I managed to pass those exams straight out of university and went to the selection panel, and they said, so which departments are you interested in? And I said, I really want to work at Defra. That's my number one choice. And they said, are you sure? Because this was 2001 too,
Okay.
and environment wasn't cool at the time. Most of the graduates wanted to work at the Treasury or Foreign Office or something kind of exciting like that. But I was definitely sure that it was going to be environment. And they sort of said, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, we've got plenty of room. So I went straight into Defra, and that was my entry point. And yeah, it all went from there.
And you sort of, you've gone and done some time within that civil service and the public sector, a little bit of secondment work as well, from what I can gather. How do you think those two interact and have trained you up into the sort of experience that you need?
It's been incredibly positive to try different sectors and see how all these problems come together from different perspectives. As soon as I joined the civil service, I realised that policy making was only one tiny slice of delivering environmental benefit, and it's an important one, and I would encourage anybody who's thinking about it to give it a try. But I was always slightly chasing the action. So who's really making change? Where's it really happening? In fact, for my second fast stream post, I had to do 4 fast stream posts of a year each. I went to the Environment Agency. So I organised myself as a secondment to the Environment Agency. I worked in their Albert Embankment office in London and worked on the team looking at the Olympic park plans. So at the time, there was no Olympic park in Stratford, and there were thoughts about whether there could be one. And so I was working in the Environment Agency team, really looking at the practical implications of that. Fascinating. Yes. Went back into the civil service, did a number of other roles, and as I was finishing working on the Climate Change Act, which felt like an incredibly important thing to have done, I was contacted by a former colleague who was working at Tesco, and she said, we've got a secondment opportunity coming up. Would you be interested to come and join us for a year? And I thought, that just feels like a perfect next step, because I've done public sector, I've done a little bit of practical public sector, but I've never tried commercial, and I'd really love to get some experience on that side, delivery in the commercial sector. So I spent a year at Tesco, which was fascinating, useful, and also gave me a wonderful insight into how government policy impacts the private sector, how it's received by other organisations, and how it's actually just keeping it simple is so important. I think it's easy for civil servants to get fascinated by the details of the things they're working on and just forget that people out there have got to implement it and their jobs are busy. So after working at Tesco, I came back in again and carried on my civil service career. After I had my daughter, which was in 2013, the opportunity came up to have a bit of an extra career break. So I did that, which I would also encourage people to do. It's a great opportunity to just kind of reflect and think about how everything's coming together. And in my case, I spent a bit more time with my small child, which was also wonderful. While I was having that career break, another opportunity came up, which was a maternity cover for a year, running Sandbag, which was and still is in Europe, an emissions trading system expert data think tank. And it's a small organisation, or it was at the time. But again, this was another perspective on life. So looking at emissions trading policy from outside government, looking at how it really works in practice in quite a lot of detail, and running a small team by myself. And I thought, again, what a great compliment to all the things that have come before. I'll give that a try. So that sort of felt like it consolidated the other things I had done. I didn't find another job like that to go into directly. So I went back to the civil service after that and spent a very excellent 4 years at the Department for Transport doing a number of interesting things. And just to finish the story, I suppose, after 4 years at DFT, I was invited to apply for a role at KPMG in their advisory team. So working on deal advisory strategy work around low carbon fuels. Again, I thought, well, this is quite a good time. I've done a lot of civil service now. And there was sort of some uncertainty about how things were. I won't spend too much time on that, but it was the right time to try something new. So I went to KPMG, learned an enormous amount about business. I think building on what I had done at Tesco, but times about 100, because obviously management consultants work with a range of different clients, and so you get to see not only how consulting works, but actually behind the scenes of lots of other kinds of business as well. But then this job came up, which is just the most exciting opportunity that's ever crossed my desk. And I looked at it and thought, I know I haven't been in consulting very long, but that's kind of the opportunity of the lifetime from my point of view. And my bosses at KPMG were very sympathetic and said, if this is your perfect job, you have our full support. So all credit to them as an organisation. And here I am, and I've been here for nearly a year.
So it's a fascinating role, isn't it? And I want to just sort of talk a little bit more about what Aldersgate Group do, and you've got an interesting boss, I think, as well, within that as well. So it just talked about the work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I lead the secretariat. We're a team of 10, and the team divides into policy experts, public affairs professionals, comms team, and membership management. And we have a membership of about 70 organisations in large businesses, academic institutions and NGOs who are all leaders in their field. So they are all, they've passed some due diligence that we do and shown that they meet our criteria for companies that have really got clear processes in place and plans for delivering on net zero and the environment. We work with them to develop policy positions and to understand what challenges they're facing, and to sort of aggregate those views into positions that we put into government and also the opposition at the moment. We're not a trade association, so we don't represent the vested interest or commercial interests of a particular sector. It's really important, actually, for our credibility that that's the case. So we're very much saying, if you want to help the environment and you want to help businesses go faster, these are the interventions that you could make as government. And, we'll want to go along with it too. We think that's really important. So what's fun about my job is it does bring together all those different aspects. So I have members of the team who kind of own each of the elements, but I have to always think about how they all come together. So what's a priority for the members at the moment? What's happening in the public sector, in the policy sphere that we should be focusing on? Am I balancing the budget right? There's all that to think about as well, keeping the organisation afloat. So for somebody who likes to keep agile in my mind, it's perfect. I think the idea that I could get bored in this job, it seems very unlikely.
And it must be interesting because you're feeding into the political system while remaining apolitical as an organisation. How do you balance those things?
That's really important. We don't align with any particular political party, and our priority is always just making sure that it's clear what the policy options are and how they could be developed. We do comment sometimes on government activity, but we try to keep that kind of pragmatic and business focused. So these are the implications of the thing that you have said, and not X party is terrible because it has said something. Because I spent a lot of time in the civil service, which is obviously politically neutral, I suppose I'm trained in that sort of pragmatic approach where it has to be information-led and not ideological. And the team all seem to understand that that's the way that we approach things. So actually it's surprisingly untricky.
Okay.
I think the only times when we have to be cautious is around, obviously there are NGOs that we work with who can take a more direct approach in communicating, and we can work closely with them but have to differentiate our messaging where that's a bit more punchy.
Yes. One of the other things I wanted to talk about in the current role was around that role of collaboration. And it's something that's talked about a lot within the world of sustainability and the importance of communicating and bringing people together. And you would seem to be at the nexus of that sort of process. So how do you do that? How do you get people to work together who might actually be competitors or in sort of a more competitive world at least?
That's absolutely vital. I suppose we can talk about collaboration between businesses and other organisations, and collaboration between our organisation and others like us. We organise quite a lot of events for our members. So there's a quarterly members event where they can all come together either in person or online, where we bring in expert speakers on different topics, so they can kind of work together or talk together about particular issues of the day. We run smaller workshops where we invite members to come and help us develop our policy positions. And I think in doing that kind of drives collaboration. And so they think, there's a company over there in a different sector that I wasn't aware of who are actually doing some really interesting stuff, thinking about planning or industrial strategy or whatever the thing is that we're talking about. Yeah. And it does begin to build those collaborative relationships. I do think the relationships with NGOs are increasingly interesting as well, because a lot of businesses are thinking about how they deliver value on the environment and can deliver most benefits. And sometimes that means a partnership with an NGO, which can take lots of different forms. But I think it's an increasingly kind of prevalent model, which seems to deliver benefits on both sides, actually, if it's handled in the right way.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm just going to bring it back to your skills and your career and thinking about those sort of more communication skills, but aligned with working into a very technical area of the world. You've obviously got a non-technical background with a music degree. How have you found that? How have you overcome that, if that overcomes the right word? How have you developed your skills to be able to operate in a very technically minded world as a non-technical specialist?
Yeah. Firstly, I did do double maths and physics for A-level alongside my music A-level. So I've got a bit of the kind of, I can run a spreadsheet if necessary, and understand what that's about. Actually, as a civil servant, I was trained in critical thinking and going out to find information. So my job as a civil servant wasn't to be the world's expert on any topic, but to know who was the world's expert, and to synthesise those points of view into two sides for the minister, to say, here are the key things you need to understand about this issue. So every day I was having to look for important information, get up to speed with it quickly, understand when to stop trying though as well. So I think in my job, actually in all the jobs I've done, pretty much it's been important that I am not the world's expert on the thing, but I understand how the expert points of view fit with the wider world. So this is the scientific position, but you also need to remember that there are these economic implications, there are these social implications, there are these stakeholders who might have a strong view on the matter, and here's how it links to this other scientific position. And I think a skill, and this isn't something you get taught at school. I would love it if our school, especially during A-levels and GCSEs, students could be taught that not everything is about the information that you know and your ability to write a brilliant essay, but actually your ability to work with other people, to listen, to kind of think about the implications of things, and critical thinking. I really don't think we do enough of that at school. We are very kind of subject focused, which seems like a shame. And I started day one in the workplace thinking that the fact I could write a brilliant essay in 3,000 words would help me be effective. Probably did a bit, but I think 95% of what I achieved was through working with other people and the way that happened.
And I think that's particularly important in the world of sustainability, which has got so many different facets, and lots of things seem to be brought under that umbrella, increasing numbers of things as we go through. And one of the key skills that's often talked about is not necessarily being that technical expert who can get a little bit myopic in their area, but be able to relate that to the wider area and non-technical specialists as well. And I think what you're talking about there in terms of a skill set is really important.
Exactly. And I think the other thing I've kind of learnt over time is that everybody plays a vital role in this whole ecosystem. So the technical experts are necessary, and the people who can think about political implications are also necessary. You know, commercial operators, people who can build a business model, vital. And then people like me who think systemically, also really important as part of kind of seeing how it all fits together.
Yes.
And the main thing is to understand which of those brains you have and how you like to spend your time. I think that's the really crucial thing. And if it turns out you need an extra qualification, that's normally possible. You know, you can go and find the extra layer of thing that you need to be able to do. But understanding your own brain and the way that you like to work feels like the most important thing.
I agree. I'm interested to dig a little bit. You talked before about one of the roles being to identify key crucial issues that are of interest to your members at the moment. What are you hearing? What's sort of coming around the corner that people need to be aware of?
Our members are very interested in nature policy at the moment. I think it's often taken a back seat to kind of climate and energy in the past. But a combination of factors, I think, new disclosure requirements and just a sort of better understanding is driving lots of interest across sectors in kind of what can we do? What's the role that my business plays in supporting the natural environment and natural regeneration? And still a lot of businesses just don't really understand it. You know, they're trying to ask consultants, they're working together with us and all sorts of other things and seeking more clarity from the government. So I think one of the things we're talking about around nature policy is, yes, you've got these high level goals for 2030. That's fantastic. How's it really going to work? So what do you want from businesses? What's the role that businesses can play? And I think that's one thing we will take to a new government. The other big thing is around industrial strategy and what's the future of the workforce. It goes along with that, but the workforce future will be drawn from what are the technologies of the future? What are the industries that we see as important? And I don't just mean steel making, I mean installing heat pumps and working in the woodlands and all the other many things that we'll need, you know, and continuing with the legal profession and all the other knowledge-based professions as well, which will be central to delivering environmental benefits. I think a lot of businesses just want much more clarity about how the government sees that future in the UK. That sort of clarity is what will attract investment into a lot of the companies that are so important to us. That investment has been draining out. I think we've had a lot of stories about companies who have been looking for investment and just can't get it because it's going to the States, it's going to Europe, and we want to change that. But it really will mean setting a clear direction, and again, it's bringing things together. So not just decarbonisation. So it's wonderful if we have a target for decarbonising energy, but what does that mean for our heavy industry? How do we join these things together? How do we make sure we've got the grid support for new charge points for heavy goods vehicles?
Yes.
All of that.
No. And just pick up on an interesting thing, which is that sort of the collaboration between countries and regions and the value of a little bit of competition. To say in America with the Inflation Reduction Act and the investment that's gone in via that, everybody's racing a little bit to pick up on that, I think. How do you see that sort of opportunity created by the way that different parts of the world are approaching these things?
I think this is one of the big questions of our time, actually. What's going to be the balance between sort of protectionism and building a national industry in whatever sector versus just saying, actually, the supply chain for that, whatever it is, material will be elsewhere. We'll need to supply them to draw on that. I think every country needs to understand what its national strengths are and try and play to those and support those and have a clear story. At the moment, it feels a little bit like we're all running in directions without quite knowing what those directions are. I think at Aldersgate, we're increasingly kind of aware that there's vulnerability as well. So if the UK doesn't understand what we're dependent on from others, and that supply chain suddenly dries up, you can have whole kind of areas where we just can't get hold of something. We'll no longer have computer chips, certain kinds of food. That can happen really quickly. And, vulnerabilities caused by climate change, by ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal, all many factors, pandemics, of course, can lead to vulnerability in supply chains. But I do think lots of countries are thinking about that kind of autarky, self-containedness.
And related to that, there's a danger of offshoring the carbon as well, isn't there? And offshoring the issues that we've got. It seems to me that there's a much greater emphasis on supply chain management, which I think is a very encouraging part of that process. Are you seeing that?
That's
as
absolutely
well?
right. And if you look at, for example, the Transition Plan Task Force guidelines for carbon reporting, put a focus on Scope 3 supply chain. How do you know what your supply chain is doing? I think that's step one for a lot of companies, is just mapping and having data. It's really hard to get hold of. How do you support some of your supply chain companies? So I think an increasing shift to focusing on SME activity and just understanding all of that. It's really hard, and I think most companies haven't cracked it yet, but the conversation has definitely steered over there now.
And it needs to be done. So
absolutely.
That's brilliant. We're sort of coming to the end of the conversation. I'm keen to get your thoughts about tips for people looking to follow in your footsteps. And we've sort of touched on a few of those things, but you've managed to find your perfect job. Are there any things that you'd particularly pick out to say, okay, these are areas that individuals looking to develop a career in sustainability need to be aware of?
Firstly, it is really competitive. I know that at the moment. And it might be necessary to do jobs that you're not enjoying all that much at the time, but just think bigger picture. I definitely had times in my career where I thought, why am I sitting here writing this document? I'm incredibly bored. This topic doesn't excite me. But you have to sort of think, what are the skills that I'm building while I'm doing this? Am I making connections with others while I'm doing this? How might this help me in future? It's okay. Or just something will come of this. I don't know what it is yet. Yeah. Just sit it out. As long as you've got a bit of a plan. So, if you're sitting in something you find frustrating, can you enlarge that within the organisation you're in? Or should you be having conversations with others to try and build that out? And those conversations as well, I would say, I did it completely by accident, but I've always loved catching up with people for coffee, building connections, and it just has been so useful in every way. So if you're not sure if it's worth spending time on meeting with someone, having a chat, just do it. It always is.
Definitely. And I just bring out, it's sort of taking ownership of that as well. I was interested in your story about looking for a secondment at the Environment Agency and proactively looking for those things. I think you have to take that ownership yourself. So yes, there's a value in just getting on and building skills, but being aware of the direction that you're looking to take things as well.
And also take some risks. So I definitely took a risk going into management consulting. It wasn't a field I knew at all. It could have been terribly disastrous. But I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I suppose that's the way of looking at it. I think this is a brilliant opportunity. Somebody's brought it to me. I could either sit here in my current job not being sure of my direction or just try something new. And I think that's fine. It's worth a try.
Fantastic. What a great point to leave it on. Rachel, thank you. That's been a fascinating conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And I look forward to seeing what next big things are coming around the corner as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.